12 thrones at the top of the world, 12 immortals seated around a hearth older than fire, and one of those seats, the youngest one, the last one, the throne nearest the door, used to belong to somebody else. That part of the story is rarely told. It is in the sources, but it is quiet there, almost an afterthought. The kind of detail a poet drops in passing and trusts you to notice. Tonight, you are going to notice it. Tonight, you are climbing Mount Olympus and walking the long colonnade of the gods one throne at a time, and by the end you will know exactly which seat changed hands, and why, and what that says about the kind of family the Greeks imagined ruling the world. 12 gods, 12 stories, one mountain that, in the oldest sources, has no door at all. Settle in. There is no need to memorize anything. The names will come around again, the way names always do in stories told over centuries, and any face you forget will return when it matters. This is not a list. It is a walk. The kind of slow, unhurried tour you take through a great cathedral in a city you will probably never visit again, where the guide pauses at each chapel and tells you a single story before moving on, and by the end of the evening, you understand the building not as architecture, but as a place where many lives once converged and still, somehow, do. The mountain stands in northern Greece, in Thessaly. The real one is just under 3,000 meters of pale limestone, snow-capped most of the year, and it is genuinely difficult to see the summit from below because the clouds cover it almost permanently, which is, of course, exactly the point. A mountain you cannot see is a mountain that might be hiding anything. The Greeks, looking up at that veil of cloud, decided it was hiding a city. Now, take a slow breath and let the room around you go quiet. The walk we are about to take is long, and there is no hurry to any of it. The gods are not going anywhere. The thrones are still there, in the sense that all old stories are still there. They are just waiting to be visited. The gates are kept by 3 goddesses called the Hora, the hours, the seasons. Their job is to roll the cloud back and forth, opening the way for any god who needs to go down to the world below, and closing it again when the visit is done. You can imagine them as 3 sisters at 3 different stages of life, or as 3 women in robes the color of dawn, or as nothing at all, just a softening of the cloud as you approach. The sources are not specific. The sources are rarely specific about the things you most want to see. Inside the gates, the air is different. It does not rain on Olympus. It does not snow. The wind from the lower slopes does not reach this height, and the sky directly overhead is, according to the oldest descriptions, always blue. Storms happen everywhere else in the cosmos. They do not happen here. This is the calm center of the world, and it has been calm in this particular way for a very long time. The buildings were made by Hephaestus, the lame god, the smith, who you will meet later in the tour. The walls are stone. The foundations are bronze. The pavements of the courtyards are gold, not because gold was rare to the gods, but because it was beautiful. And at this altitude, beauty is the only currency anyone bothers with. There is a great central hall where the 12 gather for council and for the long, unhurried banquets that take up most of their immortal time. Around it, branching off, are the smaller palaces, one for each of them, built to taste, full of the small private things that even gods accumulate over centuries. The gods eat ambrosia. They drink nectar. The 2 words sound interchangeable to us now, but to the Greeks, they were quite specific. Ambrosia was the food, nectar was the drink, and both of them were the actual mechanical reason the gods stayed immortal. The word ambrosia means more or less the undying thing. Eat it, and you cannot die. Stop eating it, and presumably, eventually, you could. This is the kind of small, precise detail that the ancient Greeks worked out with great seriousness because even gods need a system. The cupbearer most often mentioned is Hebe, the goddess of youth, Zeus and Hera's daughter, though later traditions add the mortal boy Ganymede, taken up to Olympus in eagle form to serve at the table. Apollo, when he is in residence, plays the lyre. The muses sing. Conversations move between the immortals the way they have always moved, sometimes gentle, sometimes furious, often both within a single afternoon. And below the mountain, the human world goes on with no idea what is being decided about it. That, then, is the room. Now, the people in it. We start, as everyone always starts, with Zeus. Zeus is sometimes called the eldest of the gods and sometimes the youngest, and both are true, depending which part of his life you are looking at. By birth, he was the youngest of 6 children, the youngest of the brothers and sisters who would become the great Olympians of his generation. But by the end of his story, he was the patriarch of all of them, and that is the version most people remember. His father was Cronus, a Titan. His mother was Rhea, also a Titan. And Cronus had a problem, which was that his own father, Uranus, had cursed him. "A child of yours," the curse went, "will overthrow you the way you overthrew me." Cronus, faced with this problem, came up with a solution that has a kind of horrible logic to it. Every time Rhea gave birth, Cronus took the infant from her and swallowed it whole. He swallowed Hestia, he swallowed Demeter, he swallowed Hera, and Hades, and Poseidon. 5 children, swallowed, sitting alive and conscious inside their father, and Rhea, finally having had enough, did not let him swallow the 6th. She handed Cronus a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. He swallowed the stone. The infant, the one she had not given him, was Zeus, and she had hidden him on the island of Crete to be raised by nymphs in a cave, with the noise of his crying drowned out by armed men clashing their shields outside the cave mouth so Cronus would not hear. There are still tourists who visit that cave today. Several caves, actually. The Cretans have always disagreed about which one was the real one, and the disagreement is itself a kind of evidence that the story mattered. Zeus grew up in secret. When he came of age, he went back, found his father, and tricked him. Variants disagree on how, but the most common version says Zeus, with the help of a titan named Mete, slipped an emetic into Cronus's drink, and Cronus disgorged the 5 children he had swallowed. They came out alive, fully grown, and ready for war. The stone came out too, and was placed at Delphi, where it remained on display for centuries, and where, in the 2nd century AD, the traveler Pausanias still reported seeing it, anointed daily with oil. A stone that had been swallowed by a god and then thrown up. People walked great distances to see it. The war that followed lasted 10 years. Greek tradition calls it the Titanomachy, the War of the Titans, and Hesiod, in the Theogony, describes it as something close to the end of the world. The sea boiling, the earth on fire, the Titans throwing entire mountains, and the Olympians answering with thunderbolts forged by the Cyclopes. The Cyclopes, you might remember, are giants with one eye, and in this version of the story, they are master craftsmen working in the deep places of the world. They forged the thunderbolt for Zeus. They forged the trident for Poseidon. They forged the helmet of invisibility for Hades. The 3 brothers won the war with 3 weapons made by 3 craftsmen, which is exactly the kind of structural neatness that suggests the story has been polished by many hundreds of retellings. After the war, the brothers drew lots. Zeus drew the sky, Poseidon drew the sea, Hades drew the underworld, the earth they shared. And Zeus took up his throne on Olympus, married his sister Hera, and began the long career of fatherhood and infidelity and divine micromanagement that would fill most of the Iliad and most of the Odyssey and most of the Greek imagination for the next 1,000 years. There is one detail to keep in mind, though, before we leave this throne. After the war, Zeus took his first wife, not Hera, but the same Titan who had helped him trick his father, Meti, whose name, as it happens, means wisdom or cunning. When she became pregnant, Zeus heard a prophecy that her second child would overthrow him the way he had overthrown his own father. Faced with this problem, he came up with a solution that has a kind of horrible familiarity to it. He swallowed her. Remember that. We will come back to it. The throne to Zeus's right belongs to Hera. Hera in the popular imagination has been reduced mostly to a single trait: the jealous wife, the vengeful queen, the goddess who could not stop punishing the women her husband slept with and the children those women bore. There is some truth to this, in the sense that the sources do contain a great many stories of Hera's anger, but it is a flat reading of a complicated goddess, and tonight you have time, so let us look at her properly. Hera was the goddess of marriage, specifically of marriage as an institution, the legal and sacred bond, the thing that held households together, the thing that organized inheritance and family and the orderly passage of property from one generation to the next. She was, in other words, the patron deity of the central social structure of the Greek world, and her own marriage was, by any reasonable measure, a catastrophe. Mythology has always had a gift for irony. Her husband cheated on her constantly. He did so with mortal women, with goddesses, with nymphs, occasionally with men, occasionally in animal form. He fathered, by some counts, dozens of children outside their marriage, and Hera spent a significant portion of her divine career trying to make him stop, and when she could not make him stop, trying to punish the women he chose, and when she could not punish them effectively, trying to punish their children. This is the part of her story that gets remembered. It is also, when you look at it from a certain angle, the story of a woman trying to defend the institution she stood for against the man who was supposed to embody it with her. There is a moment in the Iliad, in Book 14, that captures her at her most interesting. The Trojan War is going badly for the side she favors. Zeus has forbidden any of the gods to interfere. And Hera decides, with a kind of cold, practical genius, that she will simply distract him. She bathes. She anoints herself with divine oil. She borrows the magical girdle of Aphrodite, under false pretenses, telling Aphrodite she needs it to reconcile two old titans, and the girdle, which holds within it love and desire and the kind of beguilement that can ensnare even the wisest of minds, she tucks into her clothing. Then she finds Hypnos, the god of sleep, and bribes him with the promise of one of the Graces as his bride. Then she goes to Mount Ida, where Zeus is sitting and watching the war, and she walks into his line of sight. He is, of course, completely undone by her. He clasps her in his arms. The Iliad says he had never desired a goddess or mortal woman this badly, not Europa, not Danae, not any of them. And a golden cloud rises around them, and they make love, and Zeus falls asleep, and Hypnos races down to Poseidon and tells him the field is open. Greek forces surge forward. The war shifts. This is not the story of a jealous wife. This is the story of a strategist. Hera knew exactly which lever to pull, and she pulled it. And the most powerful god in the cosmos went down without ever realizing what had happened. When Zeus wakes up later and figures it out, his line is wonderful. "You mischief-making trickster." He says it almost with admiration. That is the Hera you should keep in your mind tonight, not the angry wife of children's mythology books. The queen on the second throne, with the peacock at her feet and the pomegranate in her hand, who held the institution of marriage together by sheer force of will, even when the institution itself was failing her. If you have ever held something together by sheer force of will, you might have some idea what that costs. She is also, by the way, the mother of two of the gods you will meet later. We will come to them. To Zeus's left is Poseidon, and before we go any further, you might reasonably ask why Poseidon is here at all, because Poseidon's actual home is under the sea. The answer is that Olympus is a kind of capital, and Poseidon, as one of the three brothers who divided the cosmos, has business here. He keeps a palace on the mountain, even though he prefers his halls in the deep, surrounded by sea creatures and nereids, with his wife Aphrodite at his side. He comes up for the great councils. He comes up when there is a war. He comes up mostly to remind everyone that there are three brothers, and that the sky is not the whole story. His symbol is the trident, which the Cyclopes forged for him during the war. It is essentially a fisherman's spear, three-pronged, the kind of tool an ordinary Greek of the archaic period would have recognized. The Greeks were a seafaring people, and their god of the sea carried a working tool, not a king's scepter. That detail tells you something about how they imagined him. He was vast, terrifying, capable of swallowing fleets whole, and also, somehow, the practical patron of every man who put out from a harbor at dawn, hoping to come back with something to feed his family. His epithet was Earthshaker, Enosikthon, the one who makes the ground tremble. The Greeks, who lived in a region with a great deal of seismic activity, attributed earthquakes directly to him, to a strike of the trident on the seabed, or to the shifting of his great body in the deep. They were not, by the standards of their time, wrong. The Aegean is on a fault line. The earth there does shake. And to a people without geology, what better explanation than a god whose temper could move continents? The most famous story about Poseidon is one that did not go his way. It is the story of how Athens got its name, and you should remember it, because we will come back to it from the other side when we visit Athena. Poseidon and Athena both wanted to be the patron god of a particular city in Attica, a city that, at the time of the contest, did not yet have a name. The two of them appeared on the Acropolis, and the citizens, or, in some versions, the king Cecrops, who was half snake and judged the matter himself, agreed to choose whichever of them gave the city the better gift. Poseidon went first. He struck the rock of the Acropolis with his trident, and water poured forth, a salt water spring, deep and cold, and it stood there bubbling on the highest point of the city. It was a magnificent gift in its way. It promised the city access to the sea, to trade, to naval power. But the water was salt, and you cannot drink salt, and the citizens looked at it and looked at each other, and turned to Athena. Athena, with no display at all, planted a single olive tree. The olive gave food, the olive gave oil, the olive gave wood and shade, and the kind of slow, unspectacular abundance that holds a civilization together over generations. The citizens chose her. The city was named after her. And Poseidon, wounded, furious, the sea god outdone by a tree, flooded the plains around the city in retribution, and would never quite forgive Athens for the rest of its mythological life. If you have ever lost a contest you really thought you should have won, and watched the winner take the prize with what seemed like no effort at all, you might have some sympathy for Poseidon at this moment. He went back to the sea. The salt spring on the Acropolis remained, however, and was still being shown to visitors centuries later. Here is what most retellings of the contest leave out. The Erechtheion, the great temple later built on that hill, was designed to house both the salt spring and the olive tree under a single roof, winner and loser preserved together, in a building constructed for grudging civic peace. Athens did not erase Poseidon. It enshrined him beside the goddess who had defeated him, and the temple stood that way for centuries. 2 gifts, 2 gods, 1 sacred space. The contest never quite ended, only architecturally agreed upon. The 3rd throne, then, belongs to a god with vast power and a grievance that never quite healed. Most of us know what that combination looks like. The 4th throne belongs to Demeter, and to understand her, you have to understand what she lost. Demeter was the goddess of grain, of harvest, of agriculture, of every cycle that turns from green to gold and back again. She was, in many ways, the most quietly essential of the gods, the one whose work you could see in every loaf of bread, every threshing floor, every field at the end of summer. The Greeks revered her. They built one of their most important sanctuaries in her honor, at a small town called Eleusis, and we will come back to that. But the story everyone knows about Demeter is not the story of plenty. It is the story of grief. Her daughter was Persephone, sometimes called Kor, the maiden. The Homeric hymn to Demeter, which is our oldest surviving source for the full story and dates to about the 7th century BC, tells it like this. Persephone was picking flowers in a meadow with her companions. She reached for a particular flower, a narcissus, which the gods had grown there specifically as a snare. And the earth opened beneath her, and a chariot came up out of the dark, and the man in the chariot was Hades, lord of the underworld, who had been given permission by Zeus, his brother, to take Persephone as his bride. Demeter heard her daughter scream. She did not see what happened. The hymn is very specific about this. It dwells on Demeter running, the torch in her hand, searching the world for 9 days and 9 nights, finding nothing. On the 10th day she met Hecate, the goddess of crossroads, who had heard the scream too. They went together to Helios, the sun, who sees everything, and Helios told her what had happened. And Demeter, who was not a goddess given to half measures, walked away from Olympus and refused to do her work. The crops failed. The grain did not grow. The earth, deprived of its goddess, began to die. Humans began to starve, and the gods, who needed human sacrifices, began to feel the pressure. Zeus sent message after message asking her to come back. Demeter refused. She had taken refuge in Eleusis, in a small kingdom in Attica, where she had been welcomed by mortals who did not know who she was, and where she was working as a nursemaid to a baby boy named Demophon, and trying, secretly by night, to make him immortal by holding him in fire to burn away the mortality, until his mother walked in on her one night and screamed, and the spell was broken. That is one of the strangest moments in Greek mythology, and the hymn does not soften it. Demeter, in her grief, was trying to gift this random mortal child the immortality her own daughter had been taken from. She failed, and she stopped trying, and the world went on starving. Eventually, Zeus blinked. He sent Hermes down to the underworld with instructions to bring Persephone back. Hades smoothly agreed, but before he let her go, he gave her something to eat. Pomegranate seeds. The number varies in the sources. Some say 1, some say 4. It does not matter. What matters is that anyone who eats food in the underworld is bound to the underworld, and Persephone, for whatever reason, ate. The compromise that resulted is the one we still tell. Persephone would spend part of each year above with her mother, and part below with her husband. When she was above, the earth bloomed. When she was below, it died. This is the Greek explanation for the seasons, and it is a beautiful one, and it is also probably not the original meaning of the myth. The original meaning is something deeper, and it lived at Eleusis, in the rites that grew up around this story. The Eleusinian mysteries were the most important mystery cult in the ancient world. They lasted in unbroken form for nearly 2,000 years, from at least the 8th century BC to the 4th century AD. And in all that time, no initiate ever wrote down what happened in the inner rite. The penalty for revealing it was death. We have hints. We have fragments. We know that the rites involved a procession from Athens to Eleusis, fasting, the drinking of a specific barley brew called kykion, and a culminating night in the telesterion, the great hall of initiation, where something was shown to the initiates that took away their fear of death. We know what the Greeks said about it afterwards. Cicero, who was initiated, said the mysteries were the greatest gift Athens had given to humanity. Plutarch said that initiates passed from confusion into joy. Sophocles wrote that those who had seen the rites were thrice blessed, and that for them alone, in the underworld, there was real life. For the rest, there was only suffering. We do not know what they saw. We will never know what they saw. The secret was kept. But we know that for 2,000 years, men and women, including slaves, including foreigners, including anyone who could speak Greek, walked the sacred way to Eleusis and came back changed. And the goddess at the center of it all was Demeter, who lost her daughter, and who in the loss taught a whole civilization what to do with grief. That is the throne we are sitting beside now. The fourth one, the mother who would not let go. Now we come to the throne that pays off something I told you to remember. Athena, full-grown and armed, sprang from the head of Zeus. That is the version most people know, and it is not wrong, but it is missing the strange and disturbing first half. The first half is this. Zeus, having heard that his first wife Metis would bear a child who would overthrow him, swallowed Meti. He swallowed her whole, the way his father had swallowed him. And inside him, Meti, who was, remember, the goddess of cunning, did not die. She continued to live. She gave birth to her daughter inside Zeus's body, and the daughter began to grow. Hesiod tells us this much directly in the Theogony. He says Zeus put Metis in his belly, and he says Athena later sprang from his head, and he leaves the mechanics largely to your imagination. Other sources fill in what Hesiod left unsaid. Pindar, writing a few centuries later, says that Hephaestus took an axe and split Zeus's skull open, and Athena emerged with a war cry that rang across the heavens. Apollodorus, a later mythographer, the 1st or 2nd century AD, says it might have been Prometheus with the axe, or Hermes, or a god named Palaemon, and that the place of her birth was the river Triton, somewhere in Libya or Boeotia, depending on which tradition you follow. The contradictions are the interesting part. Here is what most retellings leave out. If Hephaestus split Zeus's skull, then Hephaestus was already alive when Athena was born. But Hesiod tells us that Hera gave birth to Hephaestus on her own, out of revenge for Zeus having produced Athena without her. Both things cannot be true. Either Hephaestus existed before Athena, in which case Hera's revenge does not make sense, or Hephaestus was born after Athena, in which case he could not have wielded the axe. The Greeks knew this. They argued about it. They told both versions anyway, and they did not seem particularly bothered by the inconsistency, because the truth of a myth was never the kind of truth that depended on chronology. What is consistent across every source is the image. A god splits open the skull of the king of the gods, and out steps a fully grown woman in armor, with a war cry holding a spear. There is no infancy. There is no childhood. She arrives complete, and the way she arrives sets the tone for the rest of her existence. Athena is never anything but exactly what she is. She is wisdom, but a particular kind of wisdom, the wisdom of strategy, of craft, of the long view. She is war, but a particular kind of war. The war of the well-trained, the well-equipped, the well-counseled. She is the city itself, the polis, the human achievement of organized life on the difficult earth. And the city that became hers, of course, was Athens. We left that contest unfinished. Here is how it ends. Poseidon offered the salt spring. Athena planted the olive. The citizens chose the olive. The city took her name, and her temple, the Parthenon, sat on the highest point of the Acropolis for the next 24 centuries, partly destroyed, partly looted, partly bombed, still standing. Pictures of it have traveled to every corner of the world. The olive tree was real. There is still an olive tree on the Acropolis today, planted on the spot where the original is supposed to have stood. Athena's other myths are quieter than the births and the contests, but they show you the same thing. She helped Perseus kill Medusa, and afterwards took the head of the Gorgon and fixed it to her aegis, that strange snake-trimmed cape she wears, the one that turns enemies to terror at the sight of it. She invented the loom. She invented the bridle. She advised Odysseus through the entire 10 years of his journey home, sometimes in person, more often in disguise, because she understood that a god's most useful work is sometimes done by not being recognized. She was a virgin goddess, by her own choice, one of 3 on Olympus, along with her half-sister Artemis and her aunt Hestia. She had no consort. She had no children, in any direct sense, though she helped raise one, a boy called Erycthonios, born of an attempted assault by Hephaestus that Athena foiled, and the seed of which fell on the earth, and the earth gave birth to him. She placed him in a basket, gave it to the daughters of King Cecrops with strict instructions not to look inside, and they looked anyway, and they went mad and threw themselves off the Acropolis. This is one of the reasons people in antiquity were generally careful about goddesses' instructions. She was, in the popular imagination, the favorite child of Zeus, the one he could not refuse, the one he listened to even when he listened to no one else. And she returned the favor by being, in every conflict, on his side. The 5th throne is hers. The owl is on her shoulder. The aegis is at her side. She does not look up as we pass. She is, as always, thinking about something else. Something complicated, something 3 moves ahead of where the rest of us are. The 6th throne. Apollo. Apollo has more domains than any other Olympian, and they pull in directions you would not expect to belong to the same god. He is the god of music. He is the god of poetry. He is the god of prophecy and of healing, and, by the strange logic of ancient Greek religion, of plague. He sends disease and he cures disease. He sees the future and he refuses to make the future easier to understand. He plays the lyre at the gods' feasts, and he takes the bow and shoots men at long range without warning. He is, in other words, contradictory in the way the sun itself is contradictory. The same light that gives life can also wither. He was born on a floating island called Delos. The story is that his mother, the Titan Leto, was pregnant by Zeus, and Hera, for reasons we have already discussed, would not let her give birth on any solid land. So Leto wandered, looking for somewhere to deliver. Eventually she found Delos, which at that time was not anchored to the seabed, but drifted on the surface of the Aegean, a small, bare rock without much to recommend it. Delos agreed to hold her. In return, after the birth, the island was anchored permanently with 4 pillars and became one of the holiest places in the Greek world. Pilgrims traveled there for centuries. The remains of the temple to Apollo are still visible on the island today. Artemis was born first. She helped her mother through Apollo's birth, which is one of the reasons she became, despite her own virginity, a goddess of childbirth. We will come to her in a moment. But the place that mattered most for Apollo was not Delos. It was Delphi. Delphi was, before Apollo took it, an oracle of Gaia, the earth goddess. The site sat on the slopes of Mount Parnassus in central Greece, a place where the ground breathed. There was a cleft in the rock from which strange vapors rose, and a priestess sat over the cleft, breathed the vapors, and spoke prophecy. The site had been holy for centuries, perhaps millennia, before the Olympian gods arrived in Greek religion at all. Apollo did not establish the oracle. He took it. The Homeric hymn to Apollo, our oldest source for the story, tells us that when Apollo arrived at the site, there was a serpent there guarding it. The hymn does not name the serpent. It only says she was female and ancient and dangerous to the surrounding country. Apollo killed her with his bow, and the place where her body fell became known as Pytho, from Pythian to rot, because her body decomposed there. Centuries later, in the writing of the historian Hephaestus in the 4th century BC, the serpent was given a name, Python. By that point, in the popular telling, she had become male. But in the original, in the oldest version, she was nameless and female, and the act of killing her was the act of taking something old and turning it into something new. This matters, and the scholars who study Delphi have been arguing about it for a long time. The Homeric hymn frames the killing as a kind of pacification. Apollo is removing a danger to the local people. The playwright Aeschylus, in the Eumenides, frames it differently. He says the oracle passed peacefully from Gaia to her daughter Themis to Phoebe, and then as a gift to Apollo, with no killing involved at all. Euripides, in the Iphigenia in Tauris, frames it as a hostile takeover, a young god seizing a sacred place from the old earth. All three of these versions were known in antiquity. All three were told. Which one you believed depended more or less on what you thought about gods and old religions, and the relationship between them. Once Apollo had taken the site, he established the Pythia, a priestess who sat on a tripod above the cleft in the rock, breathed the vapors, and gave answers to the questions pilgrims brought from across the Greek world. For nearly 1,000 years, Delphi was the most important oracle in the Mediterranean. Kings consulted it. Cities consulted it. Wars were started or prevented based on what the Pythia said. The famous inscription on the temple, Gnothi Seauton, know yourself, has had a longer afterlife than almost anything else from the ancient world. His other myths show you the contradictions clearly. He fell in love with the nymph Daphne, who fled from him and prayed to be saved, and was turned by her father, the river god, into a laurel tree. The laurel became Apollo's sacred plant. The leaves are why poets and victors are crowned with laurel. He fell in love with the Trojan princess Cassandra and gave her the gift of prophecy in exchange for her favor. And when she changed her mind, he could not take the gift back, but he cursed her so that no one would ever believe her, a punishment that fits no crime and that nevertheless feels true to the kind of god he is. And he had a son, Asclepius, who became the god of medicine, and who was so good at healing that he started to bring people back from the dead, until Zeus killed him with a thunderbolt for upsetting the balance between life and death. The throne is gold, the lyre is in his hand, the bow is at his back. He is the most beautiful of all the gods, in the sources. A young man, no beard, hair the color of the sun. And he watches you pass with an expression that is hard to read, because Apollo's face is always a little more knowing than his words. His twin sister sits beside him. Artemis, like her brother, was born on Delos, but the sources almost all agree that she was born first, by some hours or some days, and she helped her mother through the long labor that produced Apollo. This is the foundation of one of the strangest aspects of her character. She swore, while still very young, to remain a virgin forever, and yet she became one of the principal goddesses of childbirth, alongside Hera and Eileithyia, She had seen what childbirth was very early. She had decided it was not for her, and she watched over other women going through it for the rest of her divine career. The name Artemis is, almost certainly, not originally Greek. Linguists have spent more than a century arguing about its origin, and the leading guesses involve Persian, pre-Greek, or Anatolian roots. What this means is that the goddess herself is older than the language used to name her. Worship of an Artemis-like figure, a mistress of wild animals, a virgin huntress, a moon goddess, predates the arrival of the Greeks in Greece. The figure was absorbed, refitted, and given a place on Olympus, but the substance of her was already ancient by the time Homer wrote. She lived in the wilderness. She moved with a band of nymphs, all of them sworn to virginity, all of them hunters. She carried a bow made by Hephaestus. She was associated with the moon, though not always. That connection grew stronger in later periods. She was associated with the bear, with the deer, with everything, untamed. The most famous temple to her was at Ephesus, on the western coast of what is now Turkey, and the temple was so vast and so beautifully built that it was counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Her stories are dark. The hunter Actaeon, a young man wandering through the forest with his hounds, came accidentally upon Artemis bathing in a pool with her nymphs. He saw her naked, which mortal men were not permitted to do. The Roman poet Ovid, in the Metamorphoses, is careful to say that Actaeon did not mean to see her. He simply walked into the wrong clearing at the wrong moment. Artemis did not stop to ask. She splashed water at him. The water transformed him into a stag, and his own hunting dogs, no longer recognizing him, ran him down and killed him. Niobe, a queen of Thebes, made the mistake of boasting that she had more children than Leto, the mother of Apollo and Artemis. Niobe had 14 children by the most common count, 7 sons and 7 daughters. Leto only had 2. But the 2, as someone in antiquity dryly put it, were enough. Apollo killed Niobe's 7 sons. Artemis killed her 7 daughters. Niobe wept until she turned to stone, and on a mountain in Anatolia there is a rock formation that looks like a weeping woman, which the Greeks identified as Niobe, still grieving. Her wrath, in the sources, is direct. She does not deliberate. She does not warn. She is the wilderness itself, and the wilderness does not give second chances. And yet, her followers loved her. She was the goddess young women prayed to before marriage, the goddess midwives invoked, the goddess of every transition between one stage of life and the next. She protected. She was fierce, but the fierceness was on your side if you stayed on the right side of her rules. The 7th throne, then, slim, young, dressed in the short tunic of a huntress, the moon at her shoulder. She does not look at us either. She is listening for something far away. There is a deer somewhere, just beyond the edge of the world, and her bow is half drawn already. Then comes Ares. There is no graceful way to introduce him, so let us be honest. Ares is the least loved of the Olympians. Even Zeus calls him the most hateful of all the gods. That is in the Iliad, Book 5, line 890, and the line is quoted by every Greek writer who came after Homer, and it is delivered by his own father in the middle of an argument, after Ares has run home crying because Diomedes wounded him in battle. Ares was the god of war, but more specifically, he was the god of a particular aspect of war that the Greeks themselves were not entirely comfortable with. He was the god of the battlefield in its rawest form, the rage, the chaos, the bloodlust, the moment when a man stops being a soldier and becomes something less than human. He was not the god of strategy. That was Athena. He was not the god of victory. That was Athena again, mostly. He was the god of the part of war that no one wanted to admit they enjoyed. His mother was Hera. His father was Zeus. He was a legitimate son of Olympus, born within marriage, and despite this, or perhaps because of this, he was treated by the rest of the family with a kind of weary disdain. The Greeks worshipped him, of course. You cannot be a warrior people without honoring the god of war. But they did so without enthusiasm. For the Greeks, he was the embarrassing cousin, the one who showed up at the family banquet bleeding from somewhere and angry about something. Here is what most retellings leave out, though. The Romans, identifying him with Mars, found him essential. They made him the father of Romulus and Remus, the twin founders of the city, which means they made him the ancestor god of Rome itself, co-equal with Jupiter in the Roman imagination, given a month of the year, March, from Mars, and a place at the center of the calendar. The god the Greeks could barely tolerate became, in Latin hands, the founder of an empire. The same god, different city, different century, completely different story. His most famous story is one we have already glanced at. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and the wife of Hephaestus, was carrying on an affair with Ares. The two of them met in Hephaestus's bed when Hephaestus was away, and they thought they were being clever about it. But Helios, the sun, sees everything. And Helios told Hephaestus. Hephaestus, who was the smith god, did what a smith god does. He went to his forge and he made a net. The net was woven from chains so fine they were invisible, finer than spider silk, the Odyssey says, and so strong that not even a god could break them. He hung the net over his bed and pretended to leave for the island of Lemnos. Ares, who had been watching for an opportunity, came at once. The two of them went to bed. The net fell. When Hephaestus called the other gods to come and see, the male gods came. The female gods, the Odyssey tells us with a kind of dry decorum, stayed home out of modesty. Apollo, looking at the trapped pair, asked Hermes whether he would mind being caught in such a net for the chance to lie with golden Aphrodite, and Hermes said he would gladly accept 3 nets that strong, even with all the gods looking on. The gods laughed. Only Poseidon did not laugh. He found the whole thing undignified, and he negotiated Ares' release on the promise of a fine for adultery. It is, in some ways, the most embarrassing scene in Greek mythology. 2 gods caught in a public trap, the whole pantheon laughing. And the laughter is the reframe move. The Greeks did not really respect Ares, even when they invoked him before battle. They feared him, the way you fear something dangerous you have to use. But they did not love him. The 8th throne is bronze and looks heavier than the others. Ares sits on it in armor. His face is grim. He is, perhaps, the only god in the room who would rather be somewhere else. The 9th throne is the one Aphrodite sits on, and the strange thing about Aphrodite, the thing the sources almost never agree on, is where she came from in the first place. There are 2 birth myths. They are completely incompatible. Both were told and known and accepted in antiquity, sometimes by the same people, and the Greeks themselves never quite resolved them. Hesiod, in the Theogony, tells the older version. When Cronus castrated his father Uranus and threw the severed genitals into the sea, the foam, Aphros, Greek, gathered around them. The foam grew. A girl coalesced inside it. She drifted on a shell to the island of Cythera, and from there to Cyprus, where she stepped onto dry land. Grass sprang up beneath her feet. Eros, desire, and Himeros, longing, followed her wherever she went. The gods called her Aphrodite, the foam-born, and from that moment she was one of them. Homer, in the Iliad, tells a completely different story. There she is, the daughter of Zeus and a titan named Dione, born in the ordinary way, not from foam, not from sea. She is one of Zeus's many children, no older than her sister Athena, no more mysterious than her brother Apollo. Both versions were widely known, both were widely believed, and the philosophical tradition struggled to reconcile them. Plato eventually came up with an elegant solution. There were, he proposed, actually two Aphrodites. One was the heavenly Aphrodite, born of foam, older than Zeus, the goddess of higher and more spiritual love. The other was the common Aphrodite, daughter of Zeus and Dione, the goddess of physical and ordinary love. The two were distinct deities who had ended up sharing a name. Plato's solution was clever, but never quite caught on. Most Greeks went on telling whichever version suited the moment. Here is what most retellings leave out, however. The name Aphrodite is almost certainly not originally Greek either. Modern linguists have traced her, with reasonable confidence, back to the Phoenician goddess Astarte, and behind Astarte to the Mesopotamian goddess Ishtar, the same goddess whose worship spread from Babylon across the ancient Near East centuries before the Greeks adopted her. Ishtar was a goddess of love and of war, of fertility and of destruction, of the morning and evening star. By the time the Greeks named her Aphrodite, much of the war had been stripped away, though not all of it. She was still worshipped at Sparta as a goddess of war, and the connection had not been entirely forgotten. The connection between her and the planet Venus is the same connection. The same goddess in different languages, looking down from the same point of light in the western sky. Hesiod's foam etymology, the lovely play on Aphros, was almost certainly a folk explanation grafted onto a name that already existed. The name came first. The story came after, to make sense of the name. Her stories on Olympus are mostly love stories, and most of them go badly. She was married to Hephaestus, the lame god, by Zeus's command, a forced match and an unhappy one. She loved Ares, as we have seen, and that ended in a net. She loved the mortal Adonis, a beautiful young man who was killed by a wild boar, possibly sent by Ares out of jealousy, possibly by Artemis, depending on the source. She loved the Trojan prince Anchises and bore him a son named Aeneas, who would survive the fall of Troy and, according to the Roman tradition, become the ancestor of the Roman people. Through Aeneas, Aphrodite's blood ran in Julius Caesar's veins. The Romans did not forget this. They built the temple of Venus Genetrix in the heart of Rome to honor her as the mother of the Julian line. Her attendants were the three Charites, the Graces, and the three Horae, who guard the gates of Olympus. She wore a magical girdle that made anyone who saw her irresistible. Hera borrowed it once, as you remember. The ninth throne is rose gold. The doves are at her feet. She smiles when we pass, not because she has noticed us, but because smiling is what her face does when it is at rest. To Aphrodite's left sits her husband, the lame god, the smith. Hephaestus is the only Olympian who works for a living. That is not quite a joke. The other gods are sovereigns, hunters, lovers, warriors. Hephaestus is a craftsman. His domain is the forge, fire, metal, the slow, patient work of making things. He built the palaces of Olympus. He made the thrones the other gods sit on. He made the chariots and the weapons. When Achilles needed new armor during the Trojan War, his mother Thetis went to Hephaestus and asked, and Hephaestus made the most famous shield in literature, the Shield of Achilles, described in roughly 130 lines of the Iliad, with the whole world depicted on it in concentric circles, scenes of farming and dancing and weddings and war. He was lame. Both of his legs were damaged. The sources disagree on how this happened, and the disagreement is, by now, a familiar pattern in Greek mythology. Multiple traditions running in parallel, none of them quite cancelling the others. In the version Homer gives us in the Iliad, there are 2 falls. The first happened just after his birth. Hera, his mother, was disgusted by his lameness. He was born with the disability in this version, and she threw him from Olympus into the sea below. He fell for 9 days. He was caught by the sea goddesses Thetis and Eurynome, who raised him in a cave under the ocean for 9 years, where he learned the smith's craft and made his first jewelry. The second fall happened later, when he had returned to Olympus. He tried to defend his mother during one of her arguments with Zeus, and Zeus, furious, grabbed him by the foot and threw him from the threshold of heaven. He fell for an entire day this time and landed on the island of Lemnos and was cared for by the people there. Lemnos became his sacred island and the center of his cult. Other sources combine the 2 falls, or tell only one, or change the order. The mythographer Apollodorus, writing centuries later, mixes the versions in a way that is internally inconsistent. But the inconsistency is the point. The Greeks did not need a single story. They needed the truth the stories pointed at, which was that this god, alone among the Olympians, had suffered. He was disabled. He had been rejected. He worked. His revenge on Hera, in the most famous version of his post-fall story, is one of the strangest sequences in Greek mythology. He returned to Olympus carrying a magnificent gift for his mother, a golden throne, beautifully wrought, the kind of thing only Hephaestus could make. He gave it to her. She sat on it, delighted, and the throne immediately sprang invisible chains around her, and she could not get up. The other gods tried everything, begging, threatening, pulling. The chains held. Eventually Dionysus, the wine god, the latest arrival, who you have not yet met, took it upon himself to solve the problem. He found Hephaestus, befriended him, got him quietly drunk over the course of an evening, and led him back to Olympus on the back of a mule. Hephaestus, by the time he arrived, was in a much better mood. He freed his mother. He was given a place at the table of the gods. He was, in some traditions, given Aphrodite as his wife in the bargain. This is the story that ends with him at the table. It is also the story, when you look at it, again, of a god who was thrown out, returned on his own terms, and was paid in love and family for the suffering he had endured. Whether he ever forgave any of them is a question the sources do not exactly answer. He made the net for Ares. He took the laughter that came with it, and he kept working. The 10th throne is lower than the others. He is bent over something at his feet, working with his hands. He looks up briefly as we pass. He is the only god who ever notices us. The 11th throne is occupied by a god who, on his first day of life, invented a musical instrument and committed grand theft. Hermes was the son of Zeus and a nymph called Maia, and he was born in a cave on Mount Selene in Arcadia. The Homeric hymn to Hermes, our oldest source for his story, probably composed in the 7th or 6th century BC, is the funniest of the Homeric hymns, and it describes his first day as a single comedic sequence: born in the morning, by midday, playing the lyre, by evening, stealing his older brother's cattle. The lyre came first. Hermes, an infant, crawled out of his cradle and immediately spotted a tortoise outside the cave. He picked it up, calling it, the hymn tells us with a kind of straight-faced cruelty, "Lovely plaything," took it back inside, killed it with a knife, and used the shell to invent the world's first stringed instrument. He stretched gut across the shell, fastened it with reed and oxhide, sang a few experimental notes, and then, having satisfied his curiosity about music, he turned his attention to dinner. Apollo's cattle were grazing in Pieria, the next mountain over. Hermes walked there by night, drove 50 of the cows backwards so their hoof prints would face the wrong direction, hid them in a cave, and sacrificed 2 of them to the 12 gods. 2 of them to the 12. The detail is not accidental. By offering a sacrifice to the 12 Olympians, Hermes was making a claim. He was inviting himself in. He was a brand new god, born that morning, and he was already presenting his application for membership. Then he went home and got into bed and pretended to be a baby. When Apollo finally found him, Apollo, who was the god of prophecy, took longer to track down a baby thief than he should have, which is one of the running jokes of the hymn. There was a confrontation. Apollo dragged Hermes before Zeus. Hermes, still pretending to be a newborn, denied everything with such elaborate cleverness that Zeus, instead of punishing him, burst out laughing. That is the reframe move on Hermes. Zeus laughed. Apollo, of course, was furious. But the reconciliation that followed is one of the prettiest scenes in Greek mythology. Hermes brought out the lyre, the one he had made earlier from the tortoise, and played it. Apollo, who had never heard music like this, was so taken with the instrument that he traded the cattle for it on the spot. Hermes got to keep the herd. Apollo got the lyre, which would become his sacred instrument forever after. They became friends. The argument was over. This was Hermes' introduction to Olympus, and it set the pattern for everything else he did. He was the trickster god, the one who could lie and yet somehow remain on everyone's good side, who could steal and yet somehow be trusted. He became the messenger of the gods, the one who carried Zeus's words to mortals, often in disguise. He became the patron of merchants, of travelers, of thieves, of anyone whose work involved crossing boundaries. And most importantly, he became the psychopomp, the guide of souls, the one who escorted the dead from the world above to the underworld. The same boundary crossing that allowed him to slip between gods and mortals allowed him to slip between life and death. When you died, in the Greek imagination, Hermes was waiting at the edge of the road, ready to take your hand and lead you down. He carried a staff called the kerykeion, the Romans would call it the caduceus, a winged staff with 2 snakes twined around it. It is, in modern times, often confused with the rod of Asclepius, which has only 1 snake and is the actual symbol of medicine. The 2 are commonly mixed up on hospital signs. The mistake is harmless, and Hermes, the god of confusing one thing for another, would probably appreciate it. He wore winged sandals, made by Hephaestus. He could move faster than any other god. He was, by general agreement, the most genuinely likable Olympian, the one you might actually want to have a drink with, the one whose tricks always turned out to be in service of something larger. The 11th throne is small and somehow almost casual. Hermes is half leaning on it, 1 foot up, as if he might leave at any moment. He winks at us as we pass. He is the only god who acknowledges us at all. And now we come to the 12th throne. The one I told you to remember, at the very beginning, when we first walked into this hall, Dionysus. Dionysus was, in many traditions, the latest god to arrive on Olympus. He was a foreigner. His worship came into Greece from somewhere else, probably from Phrygia or Thrace, north and east of the Greek world, and it came in late, after the canon of the older gods had already been set. By the time the Greeks decided how many seats there were at the divine table, the table was already full. 12 was the number. 12 was the number that had become traditional. 12 months in the year, 12 gods at the great altar of the 12 at Athens, 12 chairs set out for the great festivals. There was no room. In the version of the story that survives most clearly, the goddess Hestia, Zeus's eldest sister, the goddess of the hearth, gave up her throne. Hestia was the quietest of the gods. She did not have the dramatic stories of the others. She did not marry. She did not fight. She tended the central fire of Olympus, the fire that was the heart of every Greek household by analogy. And when Dionysus arrived, and there was no chair for him, she stood up and offered hers, and went to sit by the hearth. She is still there, in the versions that include her at all. She is just not on the throne anymore. It is one of the quietest moments in the whole pantheon. And if you have ever been the person who stood up so somebody else could sit down, you know exactly what that gesture costs, and exactly what it gives. Not all sources tell it this way. Some include Hestia and exclude Dionysus. Some include both and leave out someone else. The Roman canon, the De Consentes, kept Hestia under the name Vesta because the Roman state had its own reasons for needing her. There is, as the scholars who study this admit openly, no single canonical list of the 12. The list shifted over time. It varied by city. It varied by century. The number was fixed. The membership was negotiable. But in the version this story is following, the version that remembers the change, the youngest god is Dionysus, and the throne he sits on used to belong to his aunt. His birth is the strangest of any Olympian. His mother was Semele, a princess of Thebes, who was a mortal woman. She was loved by Zeus. Hera, finding out, came to her in disguise. The disguise was either an old woman or a friend, the sources vary, and persuaded her to ask Zeus to appear before her in his full divine form. Semele asked. Zeus, who had sworn an oath he could not break, agreed. He appeared in his glory, and the lightning, the same lightning that had killed Titans in their war, incinerated her. But the child she was carrying was half divine, and the lightning could not kill it. Zeus reached into the fire, took the unborn fetus from his dying lover's body, and sewed it into his own thigh. Some months later, the thigh opened, and Dionysus was born. Born, that is, twice. From Semele, premature, and from Zeus, complete. The Greeks called him Dithyrambus, the twice-born, and the title became, in time, a name for the kind of choral hymn that was sung in his worship. Hermes carried the infant to a place called Nysa, which the Greeks could not quite locate on a map, but knew was somewhere far to the east. The nymphs of Nysa raised him. He grew up there and learned, somehow, to ferment grapes into wine, and as he grew, he gathered a band of followers, women who became known as the Maenads, men who became satyrs, the whole strange retinue of the Dionysian cult. And he traveled the Eastern world teaching the rites of wine. Then he came back to Greece. The story of his return is told most powerfully in the Bacchae, the last play of Euripides, written around 405 BC. In the play, Dionysus comes home to Thebes, the city of his mother, and is denied. The young king Pentheus, Semele's nephew, refuses to allow the new worship in. Dionysus, with very little visible effort, undoes him. The women of the city are driven into the mountains, in a state of religious madness. Pentheus follows, trying to watch what should not be watched. He does not come back. The truth of what has happened reaches his mother last of all, and the play ends in the slow arrival of a grief no one in the story will recover from. It is, in the end, a story about what a city pays when it refuses the new god at the door. This is the god on the 12th throne. The god who arrived late. The god who taught the Greeks how to drink wine and how to lose themselves in the rites that wine sometimes makes possible. The god of the theatre. Every Greek tragedy and comedy was performed at his festival. The city Dionysia, in the great theatre on the southern slope of the Acropolis. And the god, in some sense, of the kind of joy that requires breaking the boundaries the other gods spent their time defending. He is also, in the strangest way, a god of resurrection. His own birth was a kind of return from death. His worship, in some places, included rites that involved a god's death and rebirth, which is part of why early Christian writers were unsettled by the obvious parallels. The Greeks did not see those parallels, of course. They had Dionysus first. He is the youngest. He is the latest. He is the one whose rites bursts the rules. And his throne, the 12th one, the one nearest the door, the one Hestia gave him, sits at the end of the row, exactly where you would expect the youngest in a family to sit at a long dinner. That, then, is the tour. 12 thrones, 12 gods, one mountain whose summit, even now, is hidden by clouds for most of the year. Before we leave this hall, there is one detail from the very beginning of the tour that has been waiting to come back. Step back before we go. Look at them all together. There is no canonical list. I want you to know that before you leave the hall. The number was always 12, but the names on it shifted. Some traditions included Hades, who lived in the underworld but was sometimes counted up here anyway. Some traditions included Hestia, the eldest sister, who never married and never fought and never appeared in the dramatic stories that the rest of them filled. Some included only the children of Zeus, leaving out the elder generation. The Romans kept their own version, the dii consentes, 6 male, 6 female, balanced by gender in a way the Greek list never quite was. There was no single board of 12 immortal directors who governed the cosmos by mutual agreement. There was a picture instead of a family on a mountain, watching, intervening, fighting, loving, betraying, and there was room in the picture for the gods who mattered most to whichever city you happened to be standing in. The picture is what survived. You can still see it, 25 centuries later, when you walk through any major museum and find the Greek wing. You can still see it on the pediments of temples that have stood through wars and earthquakes and centuries of looting. You can still see it in the language we use, Atlas, from the Titan who held up the sky, erotic, from Eros, museum, from the Muses, panic, from Pan, who is not even one of the 12 and yet whose name has outlasted most of them. The list of 12 was always provisional. The world they imagined behind the list was not. The gods are not on Olympus any longer, in the sense that no one really thinks they are. The mountain still stands. The clouds still cover the summit. The cave on Crete where Zeus is supposed to have been hidden is still there, and the stone at Delphi that Cronus is supposed to have swallowed has been lost. But no one is sure exactly when or how. The Parthenon still stands. The Eleusinian mysteries fell silent in the 4th century AD, and nobody alive today knows what was shown in the Telesterion at the height of the rite. The secret was kept that well. What remains is the picture. 12 thrones, a long colonnade. A door that, depending on which source you read, may not exist at all, because the gods do not need doors. They walk in mist and out of mist. They are present when they are present, and they leave no footprints when they go. You are at the door now. The Horae are about to roll the cloud back. The walk is almost over. Before you go, I want to leave you with the smallest detail from the very beginning of the tour, the one that comes back around now. There was an empty seat. The seat had once belonged to someone else. The someone else gave it up and went to sit by the hearth, and the new god took her place. That is, in some ways, the whole story of Olympus. The room never quite stops rearranging itself. The list of who is in and who is out keeps shifting. But the hearth is always there, with someone tending it, and the table is always full, and the long, unhurried banquet of the gods has not actually ended yet, in the only sense that ever mattered, which is that we are still telling these stories 2,500 years after the people who first told them are gone. The mountain still has no door. You walked in anyway. So did I. Rest now. You do not have to hold any of it. The names will come back when you need them, the way names do. Zeus and Hera and Poseidon and Demeter, Athena and Apollo and Artemis and Ares, Aphrodite and Hephaestus and Hermes and Dionysus. 12 syllables, 12 thrones, 12 old friends in a long colonnade you have just visited and are now leaving. The cloud is closing behind you. If this story found you at the right moment, if it gave you something to take into sleep with you, or something to leave at the door, you might consider subscribing to Sleepable Mythology. There are more of these waiting. More gods, more mountains, more truths older than any of us. We will be telling them gently on every day that the world keeps turning, which is to say all of them. Good night.